British Columbia Institute of Technology acknowledges that our campuses are located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish nations of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh.
Good morning. My name is Vivek Nakra, and here are your news updates to 11 o'clock. Election BC is reporting a record of number of voters who have already voted in advance polls. Just over 1 million British Columbians have casted their ballots ahead of election on Saturday. According to BC election, total eligible voters in BC are around 3.55 million, which means more than one third of voters have casted their votes. First significant storm of the season is set to hit in BC's south coast around Friday noon and last through Sunday, bringing up to 200 millimeters of rain. Environment Canada is warning the residents of an incoming atmospheric river system that will bring heavy rain over the weekend. They also says that there will be high winds along with the rain gusting up to 80 kilometers an hour in areas close to water. Areas that could see the prolonged heavy rain and high winds include Metro Vancouver, the Fraser Valley, Whistler, the Sunshine Coast, and Vancouver Island. Patients who don't speak English or French are 30% more likely to experience harm during hospital stay in Canada. According to a new research from Canadian Institute for Health Information, these patients are at a greater risk of unintended injuries like bed sores or medical errors. Reporter co-author Dana Riley says there is a cost equation for patients and healthcare system.
I think there are a variety of different reasons why we might start to think about patient safety, think about equity, and think about these as key interconnected dimensions of healthcare quality.
Israel's foreign minister confirms that Hamas top leader Yahya Sinwar was killed by Israeli forces in Gaza. Authorities conducted DNA tests on a body to determine if it was him. Sinwar was topped Israel's most wanted list since the beginning of Israel-Hamas war, and his killing strikes a powerful blow to the militant group. Foreign Minister Katz called Sinwar's killing Wednesday a military and moral achievement of the Israel's army. Saga Meghani talks more about the top leader.
Yahya Sinwar had long been Hamas's Gaza leader and took over the militant group over the summer after an apparent Israeli attack killed its previous leader. Sinwar was one of the chief architects of Hamas's attack on Israel nearly a year earlier.
Man's a terrorist. He has an awful lot of blood on his hands.
White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said some of it was American. Sinwar's death could be a heavy blow for the group, and it's also unclear what it might mean for efforts toward a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. Sagar Meghani, Washington.
India has denied working together with criminals to target 6 separatists in Canada. India's External Affairs Minister spokesperson Randhir Jaiswal suggested today that Canadian authorities had been resisting India's attempts to extradite those people to India. New Delhi ordered 6 Canadian diplomats to leave in response of Ottawa's expulsion of 6 Indian diplomats earlier this week. The average rate on a 30-year mortgage in the US moved higher for the third week in a row and reached highest since late August. Mortgage buyer Reddy Mac says that the rate rose to 6.44% from 6.32% last week. These rates are influenced by several factors, including how the bond market reacts to the Federal Reserve's interest rate policy decisions. The United Nations Food Programme says the risk of famine in Gaza remains high. WFP official Anthony Renaud says Palestinians must depend on international aid because the infrastructure in Gaza is largely destroyed.
Any improvements in food security we see are a result of the amount of humanitarian aid and commercial flows entering Gaza. With local food system destroyed and farms damaged.
October 17th is International Shakeout Day, a day that tests emergency preparedness across the world in the event of an earthquake. The weather today is cloudy with a temperature of 8 degrees Celsius. The temperature is expected to go up to 12 degrees Celsius by the noon and fall later in the day to 7 degrees. That was the news updates. My name is Vivek Nakra.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow. This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
Pet owners take their pet health very seriously, but often don't actually know what goes on behind the scenes. I can tell you, pet health is something really important to me as an owner of a dog and a cat, and I feel like not enough time and energy goes into helping those who help our pets.
That's right. Veterinarians and people who work in the veterinary industry are some of the most important workers of all because a lot of people have furry friends. I mean, especially what happened during the pandemic. I'd like to know how they're doing and is there anything that we can do to help?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of people, when we talk about the medical field, automatically assume that we're talking about human health, and they don't really acknowledge the time and energy and also the downsides of working with animals in the animal health industry. And today we're going to dive into that. My name is Sophie Hansen.
I'm Philip Kovacevic.
And this is the More You Know podcast. And today's episode, Lending a Helping Paw, dives into the world of mental health challenges for those in the animal health, vet tech, and veterinarian industry. While I was doing my research, I actually found out 1 in 5 Canadian veterinarians and techs have reported suicide ideation, burnout, and depression.
Wow. And this is people who work with animals, so it really isn't sunshine and puppies, that is. It's not fun to hear.
Mm-hmm. And when I was speaking to Ellie Iraqi, who is actually a vet tech in a clinic in South Surrey and also a student at KPU studying biology, she told me that every day offers something new and something that goes underreported.
A couple weeks ago, or a few weeks ago, we had this dog in who was very, very old and who could not walk, and all she could do was breathe. She was not reacting to any of our touches, but the owner did not want her put down. I thought about that a lot in my car on the way home, and I thought about it while I was trying to go to bed, and it was keeping me up because it's hard having to go in and deal with these things.
That is something that's just really hard to hear. I have an old dog myself. He's about 80 in human years. He's a spry fellow, I can tell you that. He moves around, he eats quite a bit. Also throws up a little bit, but I think that's just a part of his personality. He's got cataracts too, so he's completely blind in his right eye, partially in his left, so he's about 3/4 blind, but he still moves around the house pretty well because he knows where everything is pretty much. Doesn't stop him from occasionally bumping into a wall, but he's a happy, pretty much healthy dog that just wants to live. And from listening to this, it sounds like the dog doesn't want to leave the owner, but it knows it's not long for this world either. And the owner obviously doesn't want to leave them either.
Mm-hmm. I can tell you I definitely went through a similar situation. I can tell you I definitely went through a similar situation many years ago when I was probably in 5th grade. And I had a dog, an old basset hound, who was very stinky. He was 13 when we decided that it would be best to put him down because he had developed cancer to the point of which he couldn't walk downstairs in order to go to the bathroom in our backyard. So my family, that was a really, really tough decision for us. So I can imagine at a vet tech's point of view or a veterinarian's having to do that sort of thing, euthanasia, which is such an emotional time for many different parties, having to do that on a daily basis, multiple times a day, maybe. So imagine that now impacting your mental health, having to sit with that, having to go home and try and decompress. I can only imagine how difficult that is.
I feel like the media really glamorizes going into this industry because they make it out like you are able to play with animals all day and like it's this big party, but it's not. And this is kind of the reality of it because it's not, and it's a difficult job, and it does take a toll on your mental health. And even like there's sometimes when people will drop off their dogs to be euthanized, but they won't stay for it. They'll just drop the dog off or the cat and pay for the euthanasia and then leave.
Yeah, that also reminds me of a conversation that I had with Dr. Marco Venus. He's a veterinarian and also a director at the Society of BC Veterinarians. He talked about how veterinarians experience burnout and mental health issues from just the differences in patients they get per day.
You're dealing with a lot of emotions, and it can be a roller coaster, right? One moment, you have a happy family that brings in a new puppy that you need to vaccinate, and everybody's happy. The next moment, we have another family who's bringing in, a 14-and-a-half-year-old golden retriever that is riddled with cancer that you have to put down.
I can only imagine after a week of experiencing something like that, your emotions being whipped left and right. I can only imagine the kind of turmoil that you're dealing with even when you leave the office. Like we heard Ellie mention, you're sitting in your car driving home. The radio's probably off, and you're sitting there with your thoughts. Maybe they're keeping you up at night because of all of these different situations that you're having to deal with. And potentially you may not have the resources to deal with those situations. And without those resources, you're left to kind of just think about them and exist thinking about those. Without those proper resources, it's going to be really hard to move past that.
Reach out. The most important part is that you need to realize that you're not alone. There's a lot of veterinarians that are struggling with those things, and you do not have to go through it alone. If you reach out, there is a lot of programs that will help you. To give you an idea, one of the things that we do as a society, the Society of BC Veterinarians, we have a mentorship program where we can basically put these veterinarians in touch, with another veterinarian who on a volunteer and also on a confidential basis, can act as a sounding board. Just sometimes just talking to somebody who is also in the trenches, who understands from personal experience, what you are feeling and how does that affect you, can be a huge relief. To give you an example, not that long ago, I was contacted by a young veterinarian who got her first official board complaint. So, that means that, a client felt that she did something wrong, complained to the Veterinary Medical Association, and, they, of course, are tasked with investigating those complaints, and that's, pretty intense process. So it was stressing her out, terribly, but just being able to talk to somebody who said, well, yeah, this is the process, this is how it works. A lot of people go through this, a lot of veterinarians go through this. It was, tremendously helpful for her, and it really kind of got her off the ledge.
And burnout is one of the most common things that veterinary workers deal with. But not a lot of people know the signs, at least not until it's too late. So there's a feeling of hopelessness that can come from this as you do this kind of job. Exhaustion, of course, and just a reduced performance in a job that you got into because you care.
Yeah, and I can tell you from firsthand experience that these signs can be really, really hard to identify in the middle of dealing with all of these daily activities. In my conversations with Ellie, she actually shared that she seeks a therapist to help her. She also shared that she deals with borderline personality disorder, so dealing with that in terms of mental health, and also dealing with a profession that it takes a toll on your mental health constantly. It can be really hard to deal with if you don't have the proper outlets for it. She said that finding a healthy way to deal with these emotions can actually make you an even better caretaker for the animals.
I found that when I have people that I trust around me that allow me to talk about things, and not even just give me solutions, just allow me to talk about them, that's been a really, really positive outlet for me. Nothing has worked as well as talking things out. And being able to talk about things and get them off your chest, because a lot of times things are confidential and we're not allowed to give the nitty-gritty details of them, but being able to talk about things in a confidential setting with a therapist who you're able to trust and who will give you not just advice, but just a safe space to talk about things, I think that would really, really benefit the medical industry.
I feel like this is a universal experience for everyone in every kind of industry here in Canada. And through our research, we actually found that Statistics Canada reported in 2018 that roughly 5.3 million people in Canada had mentioned they needed some sort of help for their mental health. And I feel like, since we've gone through the pandemic and since we've seen internet access increase in many different ways, I feel like that number is bound to increase by a ton.
Yeah, I know I've certainly had problems of my own when it comes to my mental health. And the one thing I've just been very glad that I did was I reached out. I talked to people who care about me and I care about them. And it just became a very honest conversation that helped me tremendously put things into perspective and realize things aren't as bad as I thought.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode, Lending a Helping Paw. This has been the More You Know podcast, and I'm Sophie Hansen.
And I'm Philip Kovacevic. Give your furry friends a treat on us, and we'll see you next week. This episode was produced and edited by Philip Kovacevic and Sophie Hansen, with music by Sweet Beats 808S on Pixabay.
A big thank you to our guests Ellie Araki and Dr. Marco Venus for speaking to us on such an important topic.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretnero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT